Welcome to Growing Your Business Through Podcast Marketing from Getting Started to Getting Business. I am Adam Toris. I'm a marketing and content consultant and coach with Cognicom Media. For almost 20 years, I have almost 20 years of award-winning marketing experience working, doing content, public relations as a consultant, a coach, a speaker, and helping businesses and professionals do marketing and create content that not only gets attention, but drives engagement. Throughout my almost 20-year career, I've worked for multi-billion-dollar publicly traded companies, global nonprofits, national law firms, tech startups, retail businesses, mom and pops, entrepreneurs, realtors, you name it. Throughout my career, I've done all types of projects, from managing multi-million dollar marketing budgets to six-story high digital billboards in Times Square, to creating tweets that generate $120,000 of new business in 20 minutes, to managing international social media campaigns, creating ideas for South by Southwest Interactive Festival that ended up being featured in national news broadcasts and the homepages of Mashable, Yahoo, and Forbes, and launching numerous podcasts. In 2017, I was named one of New Jersey's best marketing communication professionals under 40 by the NJ Ad Club and Jersey Shore Public Relations and Advertising Association. So as a marketing consultant, one of the things I get asked all the time is, what's the next big trend? And a lot of this goes to people having seen social media blow up. Obviously, Facebook's been around for over 10 years now, but you've seen things like Instagram and even TikTok blow up. And people really want to be on the cusp of the new trend, because being an early adopter really helps get you noticed faster. And you want to be one of the early adopters. So the next big trend is audio marketing. And podcasting, which we're here to talk about today, is really leading the way. And there's lots of reasons why audio marketing is the next big trend. And we'll go over the various ways of, the ease of making it and ways to target your customers, and why it's growing so quickly as it is. But before we get into podcast marketing, I just want to go over a little about the current state of modern marketing. When it comes to marketing, there's only really two types of marketing. There's business to business, B2B, and business to consumer, B2C. You may hear people say, well, law firm marketing is different, or accounting marketing is different, or this industry is different. And sure, there are some industries that have regulations that are regulated by government agencies or whatnot. So there may be things that are different, but regardless of what they are doing, it always fits into one of these two categories. Print, TV, and radio are dead. You hear this a lot, and it couldn't be more true. Print advertising, whether it be newspaper, phone books, even local magazines, whatever it may be, they sell you on their distribution. And the distribution really, it goes out to all these people, but the people aren't consuming it. A lot of people throw it right in the recycling before it even enters their house. So people aren't doing it. When it comes to TV, a lot of people have cut the cord and are doing streaming services. So they're not even exposed to the ads that they're seeing. And when it comes to, if they do still have cable, when it comes to the commercials, what they're doing is they're picking up their cell phones and scrolling. Think about what you do if you still have cable. You're scrolling through your social media. Radio, well, terrestrial radio is pretty much dead as a whole. Most people consume radio in their car. Most cars these days, if you're leasing or buying a car, it comes with free satellite radio. And even if you're not, a lot of people have given up on radio and are doing things like streaming music or downloading podcasts and listening to podcasts. If you don't have a digital presence, which means on the internet and social media, and you're not posting content on a regular basis, you pretty much don't exist. As I said, people have gone more towards their consuming content on their smartphones these days. So if you're not posting content on your website, if you're not posting on social media, they might not know you're still in business. The pandemic has changed the way we do business. There's a lot less foot traffic. People aren't commuting to work really. And a lot of businesses have gone out of business because of the pandemic. So people might not even know you're still doing business if you're not posting content and letting them know that you're still alive. People don't want to be sold to. This is probably the biggest thing when it comes to marketing. Think about yourself when it comes to things. If you know you're being sold to, you immediately tune out. And good marketing is all about storytelling. It's about putting your client or customer as the hero of your story, and because they all have needs, wants, pains, desires, and you are the guide. You're answering those and showing them how to reach the answers to that. You have to give your audience a reason to care. More, as we just talked about, more and more content is being consumed on mobile devices. In fact, podcast listening on smartphones has increased 157% since 2014. This stat is about a year old, so it's definitely grown since then. When it comes to marketing, you need to get in front of your audience and then get their attention and cause them to take action. Again, this is social media. People are scrolling by, and your content has a fraction of a second to capture someone's attention and get them to stop the scroll. So not only do you have to get them to stop the scroll, but you have to get them to cause action, which is contacting you or buying your product. So all about podcast, audio and podcast marketing. So why is the future of marketing audio? Well, mobile devices. We've mentioned smartphones multiple times already, and there's tablets, smartphones. These make audio content extremely easy to consume. Smart home devices like Amazon Alexa, Google Home, Apple Home. Amazon literally will give you a free Alexa device depending on how much you order. These are becoming more and more common, and because of it, this is how people are consuming music, consuming podcasts, and they're obviously audio based. Streaming services. Streaming services have literally changed the way we listen to music. No one's buying CDs anymore. Few people are even downloading music anymore because they can stream it on things like Spotify, Audible, SoundCloud, Pandora. There's also things like podcasts, like audiobooks, which have grown in popularity. And social media channels. Some of you may have heard of Clubhouse. Clubhouse is one of the newest social media networks. It's one of the newest ones. It's been around for a few months now, and it's grown in popularity over the last 3 months or so. It's all audio-based content. There's discussions between people who don't know each other around the world. There's live podcast broadcasting. There's all types of things. The thing with Clubhouse is you need to have an iPhone right now, and it's invite only. So you need to know, if you need to have an iPhone and you need to know someone that actually has invites. There's limited amount of invites you get when you sign up. And just about a week and a half ago, Twitter rolled out their own version of audio content that's pretty much mimics what Clubhouse is doing. And I'm sure other places will be doing it as well. So what's so big about audio content? Obviously, what we've gone over. Audio content, it's easily consumed. It's easy to make. You can make it with your cell phone. You can make it with your computer. It's affordable. Back in the day, if you wanted to record audio content or radio show, you had to rent studio time or get studio time, have an engineer, or if you're going to do it in your house, you need to have tons of expensive and bulky equipment. And it's ideal for targeting specific audiences. The topic of your podcast can reach the people that are looking for that specific topic. And that's one of the biggest best things about podcast marketing is you can reach very niche people and very niche audiences. So a little bit more about podcasts. Well, what are podcasts? Put simply, podcasts are recorded radio shows which can be either downloaded or streamed online. It's very similar to the radio most of us grew up with. They can be listened to at home, at work, while commuting, or while exercising. Again, easily consumable. It's passive consuming as you have to think, people, you're doing housework, you're at work, you're driving, whatever it may be, it's easily consumable. Podcasts typically run between 15 minutes and an hour in length. There are ones that are as short as 3 minutes. But then again, if it's only 3 minutes long, you have to then every 3 minutes find something else to listen to. There are ones that I've seen as long as over 2 hours, 2.5 hours, which is pretty much the length of a feature film. If your podcast is that long, you really need to have great content. It's probably best to chop it up into multiple, at least 2 episodes or multiple episodes, just to make it easily consumable. Also, if it's very more than an hour, you're asking a lot of in time commitment. So a person may have to pick up listening at a different time. There are two main types of podcast series. One is an ongoing series, which, an ongoing series is they're posting an episode every week, every 2 weeks, every month, whatever it may be. Um, they are often broken up into seasons where there'll be 6 9 months of podcasts, and then there'll be like a 2 month break, 3 month break where they're developing more episodes, and then they release another season, just like similar to TV shows. Then there's limited series. Limited series have a finite ending. They know it's really on a topic that there's only so much to say. They know there's only going to be 4, 6, 12 episodes, and then it's going to end. There are many different formats podcast shows can take. The main one is interview, where it's a classic, very similar to a classic radio show, where it's a host or hosts interviewing a guest. There's documentary style. Documentary style is very popular with true crime podcasts, where there's a host or hosts and they go through different things. There may be interviews with guests, but they're recorded and they are played not as real time as an interview is. And then there's live. Obviously, with the pandemic, things have changed a little bit, but I'm sure there's a live where people are documenting live experiences. I'm sure right now there's one where someone's documenting their experience getting their COVID shot. They go through different things. They're recording real time, experiencing different things. Live can also be with an audience. Some podcasts, whether it's a 5th-year anniversary or 100th episode or whatever it may be, have rented out theaters or venues, clubs, restaurants, and they have a paid audience. Podcast fans buy tickets to it, and they have a live audience. You'll also see live podcasts in industry conferences and trade shows, where part of the programming will be instead of your typical panel or keynote speaker, it'll be a live podcast that's recorded. Podcasts can be about any topic, including very niche ones. One of the first podcasts I worked on was for government affairs for healthcare and life sciences industries. Obviously, it's extremely niche, but because there isn't that much content out there, and there's a lot of people that are interested in that and who work in that space, within the first 24 hours, the combined streams and downloads that we had was somewhere around 75, which is pretty good. Popular topics include business, comedy, education, news, politics, and true crime. One of the most popular podcasts a little over a year ago was one on the Nixon impeachment. Obviously, Nixon impeachment happened over 40 years ago. Richard Nixon's been dead for over 25, I believe. And so there's nothing really new has happened, but because of what was going on at the time in current political news, people were interested in learning what had happened back then. True crime, Serial, as in serial killers, not Cereal the breakfast treat. Serial was probably the podcast that introduced people to podcasts a few years back. That's how, that's, I think, the first podcast I really ever listened to. The host actually did it as really a passion project, and it became, now she has a full-time podcasting business. You can advertise on podcasting. And this is done through recorded audio commercials, just like you hear on radio, or live reads, where the host or hosts will do a live read of content promoting your business or your product. Some podcast statistics. Podcast popularity over the past few years has grown at a rapid rate. The pandemic has actually added fuel to the fire, because people are home, they're not commuting as much. They have more free time, so they've decided to start recording podcasts about the various things that they're into. So how fast are podcasts growing? Well, in June 2018, Apple reported that there were about 550,000 podcasts and 18.5 million episodes listed on iTunes. In October 2020, Apple reported that there are 1.5 million podcasts and about 34 million episodes listed on iTunes. And just last month, in January 2021, there was 1.75 million podcasts and over 43 million podcast episodes listed on iTunes. And this is just iTunes. iTunes isn't the only place where podcasts are, and not all podcasts are listed on iTunes. So you can see that in just about 2.5 years, it's more than tripled the number. 50% of all homes are podcast fans. And this is going back from 2017. So I'm sure that that stat is even higher now. 55% of the US population, 155 million people, have listened to a podcast. That's up from 51% in 2019. 37%, 104 million people, listened to a podcast last month, and that's up from 32% in 2019. 24%, 68 million people, listen to podcasts weekly, up from 22% in 2019. 16 million people refer to themselves as avid podcast fans. And again, the stat is over 2 years old, so I'm sure it's even more now. And 51% of the podcast listeners are male, which is the same as the US population. 45% of monthly podcast listeners have a household income over $75,000, and that's versus 35% of the total population. So you're seeing that podcast listeners make more money. 27% of US podcast listeners have a 4-year college degree versus 19% of the college population. So you're seeing that podcast listeners have a higher education. And the age of monthly podcast listeners versus the US population, 12 to 34 is 48% versus 37% of the population. 35 to 54 is 32% versus 40% of the population, and 55 plus is 20% versus 23%. So you see, obviously, podcasts are trending younger. Podcast listeners are much more active on every social media platform. So you're seeing that, going back to how content is consumed, we're seeing that, these people, that's how they're looking for their content. So 94% are active on at least one versus 81% of the entire population. Podcasts listeners are more likely to follow companies and brands on social media. Again, going back to how they're consuming their content. Podcast listeners are more likely to subscribe to Netflix and Amazon Prime, meaning that they're less exposed to TV advertising. This is what I mentioned earlier, where a lot of people have cut the cord and are no longer subscribing to cable television. Podcast listeners are more likely to own a smart speaker. Again, it's how they're consuming content. You have to be where the people are consuming their content. And 69% agreed that podcast ad made them aware of new products and services. So what makes good podcast content? Well, like any marketing podcast, need to have two clearly defined topics, two clearly defined questions, which is so what and who cares. This goes to podcasts. There are many podcasts out there where it's a group of friends who get together to record a podcast about craft beer. They sit around the table and they drink craft beer. And even if you're into craft beer, it's only interesting for so long because it doesn't answer the question, so what or who cares? You have to give them a reason to care. Podcasts are better when there's guests. This is something that I see from time to time. It's not that prevalent, but there are people that'll do a podcast by themselves and they'll just go and they'll rant for 15, 20 minutes on something. People see there is no real change in the topic or change in things, and listeners start to tune out if you're just ranting. Even if it's just two hosts who get together, your conversation has to be really interesting to keep the listener's attention. Otherwise, you need a guest. Podcasts should be structured. Have an outline prepared. Know what you're going to talk about. Know why. Know why, the purpose of the podcast, the topic, the questions prepared. There are people out there that off the cuff are amazing guests, but if you give them questions ahead of time, they'll be even better guests. The reason being, they'll have time to think about the questions. They'll have time to think about stories that relate to the questions. Maybe they give suggestions on how to change some questions or new questions to ask. And your questions should also, excuse me, should plan sound bites and for potential use in other types of content, social media posting, whether it be a quote, we'll get into that in a little bit, or a sound bite. Excuse me as I take a drink. Content should keep your target audience in mind. Again, think about what the audience is listening, why they're listening, or why they want to listen. Be nice, be human, be conversational. People don't want to listen to someone just, again, going back to the rants. People don't want to listen to someone being negative and talking about how everything is wrong and terrible. They want to hear varying sides of different things. Be human, which is obviously show some empathy, but it's also a lot of people decide to do a podcast and they literally type out everything that they want to say and they read it from a piece of paper and they end up sounding like robots, very monotone. Be conversational. Obviously, the more conversational you are, the more people will be engaged. Podcasts shouldn't be too personal or all about the hosts. If you have a podcast and you even have a guest and you're relating everything back to you or your business, again, people are going to start tuning out because it's very self-centered. You're making it all about you. If it's all about your own viewpoints, your own opinions, people are going to start tuning out. If you have a podcast where you're like, well, the 86 Giants are the best football team ever. And someone says, well, 72 Dolphins were pretty good. What about them? And you say, no, people are going to start tuning out. People want to hear the different viewpoints and different opinions. Podcasts avoid selling. There's one podcast that done by someone that I know through business for many years now. The first 5 minutes of her podcast, 5 to 6 minutes, you can just fast forward through. It's all her promoting herself, promoting her mastermind, promoting her email list, promoting the podcast, how to like the podcast, how to get in touch with her. And literally for 5-6 minutes, that's all she's going to be talking about. It's okay to promote your business. And in fact, with podcasts, you should promote your business, but do it at the end, make it short, keep it short, simple. Obviously, you're trying to keep the listeners listening. If you're doing 5-6 minutes or even a minute in the beginning of a podcast, people are going to start tuning out. Stay on topic. This is a big thing that happens quite often. I can tell you that recently, 2 former colleagues of mine who are both very intelligent people, they're both pharmacist attorneys, appeared on a podcast. And so I listened to it thinking it was going to be a great discussion. It was a pharmacy themed podcast. About halfway in, the host sort of ignored that there was 2 guests and focused on one. And then he started talking about food. What's your favorite restaurant? What type of takeout have you been getting lately since the pandemic? What even did? And it went totally off topic from pharmacy to food. And I guarantee you that's when the people that were listening just tuned out. Don't sound cheesy. Pay attention to how popular podcasts and interviewers are doing things. This really goes to really honing your craft as an interviewer. You're not going to see, say, Jimmy Fallon have Brad Pitt on and say, well, here's Brad Pitt. Brad, why don't you tell us about yourself? There's a whole lead into when you're interviewing people. You have a buildup. You're not going to just give them a blank, tell us about yourself. You're going to ask questions or have leading statements that have them explore things. So the more you expose yourself to people that are doing the type of things that you're doing, if it is interviewing, the better your interviews will be. So what's the structure of a podcast episode? Well, there are 3 main parts to every podcast. The first part, this is going to be a shocker, is called the beginning. This is where you give the listener a reason to care, which is known as the sell or the hook. And there's commonly 2 ways this is done. First is to pose a question. Think about one of the things, ways to pose a question is something that's going to capture someone's attention is thinking about, COVID-19 has changed the way we operate in public spaces. So what's the chances, when I go into a public restroom, should I sit on a toilet seat? Can I get COVID that way? Can I get other diseases that way? So that's going to capture someone's attention. The other way is to promise something amazing where you start talking about the story, about the different things and the turns it takes. You may even say something like, just give a warning at the beginning of the show where you say, hey, just so you know, there's some adult language in this episode. So if there's any kids in the room, you might want to have them go away. This is referred to as signposting, where you're giving people things to expect. And obviously, with signposting, you don't want to tell them the whole story in the beginning because then there's no reason to listen. The second part is, shocker, the middle. And this is where you deliver on the promise or the question or answer the question that you asked in the beginning. Good middle content has something new happen every 45 to 90 seconds and this is because sameness leads to listeners to check out. This is commonly the most common way this happens is if you're interviewing someone, when they you ask them a question, they'll just go on and on and on and not really limit themselves. So they may be talking for 90 seconds, 2 minutes without any real change. So how do you do what's something new that can happen is, well, a turn in the story, a new character, a new idea or theory, a shift in emotion, or something as simple as entrance or exit of music. Entrance or exit of music. A lot of podcasts use music, add music in to the background in post production. It's very common with true crime podcasts, most especially less in common with interview podcasts. So the last part is, shocker, the ending. And with the ending, the less you do, the better. The goal is really of the ending is to get out gracefully. Let the story, which is the middle that we just talked about, do all the work. Don't try to make some grand point about the story, what it means. Really have, if you're doing the middle correctly, you're telling the listener to make their own decisions, and they're coming up with their own thoughts and theories on different things. Don't do a big summary because, again, you're trying to keep people's attention. They just heard everything that happened. You might be tempted to do a summary because one of the things in public speaking is the old theory is, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. But that doesn't happen with podcasts. And, don't step on the story you just told. Do as less is definitely more in these type of situations. So how do you use podcasts for marketing? Well, the easiest way is to advertise on a podcast that's targeted towards your ideal audience. As we went over, there are millions of podcasts out there. There are ones for very niche things. There's ones for TV shows that happened 25 years ago and had one season. There's all types of things. So you can target specific people that are the listeners of this podcast. And usually advertising on podcasts is going to be less expensive than a lot of other types of advertising. Another way is to be a guest on a podcast targeted at your audience. Now, this is a little bit more difficult if you're approaching someone, even though there are tons of podcasts out there. People who have podcasts get approached by people wanting to be guests all the time. So you really have to sell yourself and give them, you have to give the host a reason to, book you or have you as a guest. And obviously using podcasts for content, creating content with a podcast recording. Now, this can be a recording of your own podcast or a podcast where you appeared as a guest, and you can chop it up into different things. You can make social media posts, whether it be, a text quote or use a sound bite to create a image or a video. If it's recorded, depending on how it's recorded, if it's just audio or if it's audio stripped from video, you can have videos. And then you can make it into a blog. You can just post a video as a blog, or you can take a transcript of the podcast and then use that as a blog. Having your own podcast, and this is big, having your own podcast positions you as a subject matter expert and a thought leader in industry and leads to greater brand recognition. Now, if you have a podcast on a certain subject, people are automatically going to assume that you're an expert on this subject. So it positions you. And the more that you're out there on the internet, the more you're out there on social media, the more your name pops up, the more credibility it will give you. So when people are doing looking and doing research, or whether it be looking for a product, whether it be a publication, looking for someone to give a quote, whatever it may be, they're going to see you as a subject matter expert and a thought leader in the industry. Inviting potential customers on as guests has a much better result than a cold email or call. We've all gotten the emails from people from that we've never heard of, never talked to before, that says, I would love to have a conversation with you about how we could potentially work together on a mutually beneficial relationship. What they're really saying is, I want your money, and I know you have money, and my business does that could potentially help you. Well, it really goes to when you're inviting, if you reach out to someone, you can if and you say, hey, I have this podcast, I'm a thought leader in the industry, I would love to have you on as a guest, and I'd love to have you talk about your business and what you do. More likely than not, they will say yes, because a lot of people, given the opportunity to talk about their business and promote themselves and their business, they will take that. And if you reach out to a potential client or a potential customer that you've been trying to wrangle in, that you can then build that relationship, and then you're more likely to get their business because you had them on as a guest. It's a much easier way entry. It's a path of least resistance than just a cold call or email. Next is the high school party method. I'm sure many of you remember high school, where there is the one kid. He wasn't the biggest athlete. He wasn't the smartest kid. He wasn't the best looking kid, but well, his parents went away on the weekend. So he had parties, and he would invite all the cool kids. So by default, even though he wasn't the coolest, he wasn't the smartest, the best looking, the star athlete, he was cool because his parents went away on the weekends and he had these parties. And this is similar to what inviting people on. You can then piggyback on their audiences. If you invite somebody on that's in a part of the industry that you're not in, or you're looking to build your audience in, you then have them on as a guest, and then you promote it. You tag them on social media. You tag their business on social media. You have them ask them to promote it and them to post it, and then you get exposure to all their audience. If you're on a podcast, you're going to as a guest, you're going to promote it. You're going to tell your family, you're going to post it on LinkedIn and tell people to listen. So then the person who's the host then gets exposure to that whole audience. So how do you start a podcast? Well, the best first way to start is to listen to different types of podcasts on multiple topics. It's kind of like you wouldn't try out for the basketball team if you've never seen a basketball game. So the more exposure you have to podcasts, the better. Whether it be, obviously we went over, there's the different types. So check out different interviews and all the different types that there are. And also check out, the more popular ones. Check out Joe Rogan, even though he's pretty controversial. He has high production value. He does things that are good. He does things that aren't good. You can figure out the things that you want to hear, and you can learn from the different things that people do. Also check out, research other podcasts on similar topics and in your industry. See what people are doing, see what people are talking about. Check out the earlier podcasts, the first ones, and check out the more recent ones and see the things that they've changed. And then that can actually help you grow and pick up on the things that they've changed. And then you can then implement them in your podcast. This is very important. Plan out several episodes, about 4 to 6 at least, I would say, before recording. Plan each episode's topic or theme. Do research and book the guests. Do research on the topics. These things are all go back to what we were talking about, having, giving, and then write questions and for each guest and send them ahead of time before the recording. The better you're prepared, the better the content will be. The other thing is record those episodes before you launch. One of the reasons why I say plan several episodes out before you record, and then record all those episodes before you launch, is many podcasts many people record one episode and then launch it. And then maybe a month or two later, they get around to recording a second episode, and they're constantly playing catch up. That is very difficult to do. So if you have several episodes already planned out, already recorded, you can just release them once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month, whatever it may be. And you're not constantly playing catch up. Um, Life gets in the way. We all get busy with work and with other life and everything else going on. So it becomes difficult to plan things out, to record things, to even just find time to record it. And then you have to edit, and then you have to post it. So it can get very difficult. How to start a podcast and what you need. Well, microphones make better quality audio. You might see this little half circle here on the side of my screens. Those of you can see me. That is actually a pop filter for my microphone. I'm actually talking into a microphone, podcasting microphone right now. Um, and it was relatively inexpensive. Tons of inexpensive equipment for computers and smartphones are on Amazon. You can literally go to Amazon and type in podcast microphone, and you'll get tons of options. Podcast microphone for iPhone, you'll get tons of options. And then check out places like Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist. I actually got this microphone. I found it on Facebook Marketplace. A guy was having a moving sale. They say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. He started a podcast, and he couldn't keep up with it, just like we were just talking about. And he stopped podcasting. So he was moving, and I got this microphone for probably about a third of what you'd pay for either on Amazon or in a store. So there's tons of people, because there's so many podcasts out there and so many people have tried their hands on it. There's lots of equipment out there that's relatively expensive because people have given up on it because they couldn't play catch up. Recording Zoom. Well, we're on a Zoom right now. When you record a Zoom, it actually gives you multiple files. One is the video and the other is just the audio. You can take that audio is literally what you need. You can take that audio straight and just start editing it. There's also Skype, Google Hangouts, all have recording features, all done with video. You can also use the video for other types of content. You can post the video of the podcast on YouTube. There's many different things you can do with video as well. Obviously, things have changed a little bit, but audio recorders on your smartphone and laptop, if you're seeing people face to face, which doesn't happen too much these days, but it's another way to do it. You can set up, if you're going to a conference, if you're going to a meeting, or just set up an interview with the person one-on-one, you can set up your smartphone, you can set up your laptop with a microphone or without a microphone and record straight there. Editing. Audacity is by far the biggest and most popular way to edit audio. It's free downloadable software. There's a Mac version, there's a PC version. There is a slight learning curve. Once you get over that, it's very easy to use, and you actually might feel a little feeling bad about this learning curve. There's also Ferrite, which is an app for tablets and smartphones. There is a free version that has limited features, and then there's a more advanced version that is a paid version. The paid version, I believe, is like $30. It's a one-time fee, and you get updates on a regular basis for it. Ferrite, the thing that's good is it's pretty basic, it's pretty simple, and you can literally edit your audio with your fingertips. So there's no real other knowledge needed. Hosting is a big thing. Once you've recorded your podcast, where do you put it? Where does it live? Well, there's many different places out there that you can choose from. They're all very similar. It's really a tomato experience. Podbean is very popular, SoundCloud, and then there's Libsyn. They all have things where you get a free amount of space to upload your podcast. And then after you reach that space, there is a paid, you do have to start paying for it. It's relatively inexpensive to pay for it. The pricing is all almost identical. The features are almost all identical. It's really what you prefer. The big thing with hosting is, though, distribution. You need to make sure that the podcast is being distributed to the various places like iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and all the different programs where people actually listen, streaming or downloading podcasts, because you want the biggest amount of exposure. If you just have it on Podbean, that's okay. You'll still get people will still find you. But you won't get the exposure that you will with the other distribution, because there's some people that just listen on iTunes, that just stream on Spotify. Best practices. Um, we've gone over a lot of stuff here today. And one of the best places to find best practices is Gimlet Academy. It's actually a podcast series about starting a podcast. Gimlet Media, it's done by Gimlet Media. Gimlet Media started off as a podcast about starting a podcast company. They very meta. They were purchased by Spotify a little over a year ago for an insane amount of money. But I definitely suggest there's checking out Gimlet Academy. It's like 5 or 6 episodes. They're all about 20 minutes long. They go over different things from booking guests to creating content, and a lot of things that we've covered here, but definitely more in depth. And with that, I'll open things up to questions. Again, I'm Adam Toris. I'm with Cognicom Media. Here's my contact info. Please reach out if you want to get started with podcasts, if you need help with your current podcast, if there's anything you need help with your content or anything like that, please feel free to reach out to me.